everybody, let's pick up where we left off last time. They stared at one another in surprise until Katy spoke. What just happened? That was strange. She was chatting happily until you asked her about Willow Dean. Something terrible must have happened there, and she must be tied up with it to react like that, suggested Patrick. But what? mused Lizzie. Well, I'm going to find out. Come on, let's carry on with our research. Why don't we go back to number 83? It's the only house left we've not been to. Number 83 was called Cedar Cottage, presumably due to the huge cedar tree in the front garden. It was a pretty white cottage with blue shutters, a yellow front door and a red climbing rose growing up the side of the house. Come on, said Katy, opening the garden gate and walking up the path. She gave the bell a long, hard ring. They waited and waited for someone to answer. Oh, there's no one in, huffed Katy. Come on, let's go. Just as they were heading off back down the path, the door suddenly opened, and there, to Katy's amazement, stood Tom Austin. Katy gulped, struggling to speak, as Tom stood there staring at her. You rang the bell because you wanted to speak to somebody, he asked. Silence followed. Lizzie came to Katy's rescue. We're interviewing locals for our history project. We wanted to find out about Willow Dean. It's been empty since the war, but no one knows why. Well, you've come to the right house. My granddad's in the garden and he's lived in Knutsbury all his life. He looks after Willow Dean now for the owners, so if he can't tell you what happened, no one can. Come on, follow me. He led them down the winding path that ran along the side of the house into the large back garden. They passed by flower beds bursting full of colourful flowers and rows of fruit trees. Tom's granddad, Charlie, was sitting in an old stripy deck chair, drinking a mug of tea at the back of the garden. He looked up, giving them a welcoming smile. Hello there! What an honour! No one under 80 calls for me these days. Patrick took a step forward and spoke up. Hello, sir. My sister and her friend are interviewing local people for a history project about life during the Second World War. We'd really like to find out about Willow Dean, but no one seems to know anything. We wondered if you could help. It was just about the longest speech Katy had ever heard Patrick give, and she stared at him in amazement. Maybe he wasn't so useless after all. The old man gestured for them to sit down on the grass, took a long drink of his tea before beginning. Call me Charlie. Well, where shall I begin? Lived here all my life. Born here, you see. Just sort of stayed put. My wife liked it, said it was a good family home. Of course, my children have long gone, all grown up now, have kids of their own, like Tom here. He's my grandson. So can you remember when Willow Dean was lived in? Katy interrupted. Charlie chuckled. Of course, it doesn't seem that long ago to an old man like me. Can you tell us about the people who lived there? Lizzie said. Charlie smiled wistfully as he replied. My best mates lived there, the twins, Harry and Frank. Oh, they were great fun, always dragging me into some trouble or other. Their dad was a local doctor, and his wife, Mrs. Graham, took in evacuees when the war started. Charlie paused and smiled to himself as he remembered happy times. They had a lovely little sister called Susie, a real favourite with everybody, always singing and playing out in the street with her skipping rope or pushing a pram filled with dolls up and down the pavement. But why was the house abandoned? Asked Katy. Is there really a haunted crying child in the house? Charlie sighed deeply, clasping his mug tightly, and began his tale. Bit of a quiet war here, really. Not much happened in the way of action. We'd rush out to watch the German Junkers on their way to bomb Liverpool, hundreds of them it seemed to us boys. Later you could see the whole city ablaze. The sky would glow with fires from incendiary bombs. Exciting for us though, far enough away to be safe, but close enough to give us a view of the action. Only one bomb ever dropped here, and after seeing the death and destruction it caused, it was one too many by my reckoning. Didn't go out and watch Liverpool burning night after night with such excitement after that. What happened? Asked Patrick. Charlie paused as he remembered the night in question. Then leaning towards them, he began his tale in a hushed, grave voice. I'll never forget the date. May the 15th, 1942. It was a lovely warm evening, clear skies, warm breeze. You could hear it blowing gently through the trees. It started off like any other normal evening. I just got home from my paper round at 6 o'clock when I heard an enemy aircraft flying low. Us boys could identify the different planes by the sound they made. Patrick inched closer to Charlie and gazed at him in open admiration. Charlie absent-mindedly leant down and patted him on the shoulder, then continued with his story. It was closer than usual and seemed to be heading for the high street. Within minutes, the sirens started to sound and we went into the shelter. What was it like? Were you scared? Did you think you were going to die? Patrick asked excitedly. Well, we certainly spent a very tense hour down there, not knowing what was happening above ground. But we played cards, Mum sang songs, and my dad played the harmonica. Oh, I don't know how you could stand it. I'd be terrified. Was everyone all right? Asked Lizzie. Charlie cleared his throat and continued. When the all clear sounded, I rushed upstairs and straight out onto the street to see what had happened. Victoria Avenue was fine, but there was loads of shouting and screaming coming from the high street. What did you do? Asked Lizzie. Well, I raced off to investigate before my mum could stop me. Charlie paused briefly, his face etched with anguish as he remembered the events of that evening. The main thing I remember is the smoke and the awful smell of burning. That and the sound of people wailing and crying. Then I heard the voices of the twins, Harry and Frank, above everyone else's. They were calling out for their little sister over and over. What had happened to her? Asked Katy. Mrs. Graham had taken the new evacuees to the cinema for a treat, leaving the twins at home in bed. My cousin Hilary from number 32 had come round to keep an eye on them and babysit Susie, who was only 3 years old, about to be 4. Charlie's voice sounded choked as he struggled to continue his tale. Beautiful little thing she was, all curly blonde hair and big blue eyes, but quite mischievous at times. A sad smile flickered across his face. The group fell silent until Lizzie found her voice. Well, was she okay? When the siren sounded, the twins were upstairs asleep. Realising what was happening, they rushed downstairs to join Susie and Hilary in the cellar, which was kitted out as an air raid shelter. They were surprised that Hilary hadn't come to get them when the siren went off, but when they ran to the kitchen they discovered why. They found her unconscious on the kitchen floor. Lizzie gasped, "Oh no, what had happened to her? Was it a burglar?" No, turned out she'd panicked. She stumbled, fell, hit her head, and that was where the twins found her. The front door was open and little Susie was nowhere to be found. They were about to chase after her when an air raid warden spotted them and marched them down to the cellar. By the time they were able to search, pandemonium had broken out, ambulances and sirens wailing everywhere. Charlie stopped speaking, put down his tea, stood up and made his way over to the potting shed. Patrick, eager to find out more from Charlie, leapt up and followed him inside, leaving the girls sitting on the grass. Tom took up the story where Charlie had left off. Grandad doesn't like to remember this part, but I know what happened. The cinema took a direct hit that night. Everyone was killed. Not one single survivor. Lots of Grandad's school friends died that night, as well as Mrs. Graham and her evacuees. As for Susie, no one ever found out what happened to her. She was put down as missing, presumed dead. The girls fell silent for a moment. Katy couldn't get over how sad it all was. After a while she said, "But that doesn't explain why the house has always been empty." Soon afterwards, Dr. Graham came home from the war, collected the twins and left. They never returned and left everything behind. Grandad thinks that Dr. Graham couldn't bear to be in the house. It was too painful a reminder of the happy family home it had once been. "But why didn't he sell it?" asked Lizzie. Grandad thinks he wanted it to be waiting for Susie, just as it was left when she went out that evening. That's why when the house looks like it's frozen in time, they left everything behind so it would look exactly the same for Susie. And that's the end of that reading. Okay, bye-bye.